Bruce, thank you for doing this. I know you're spending most of your time on Zoom meetings these days, but we really appreciate having you and having the chance to talk a little bit about this, what's going on in the sport space, and how your work really has, I think, been relevant to this space for a long time, but feels even more so given the current state that we're all facing. So thank you so much.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. You know, I love spending time with you, talking about this stuff and all things sport. So it'll be fun.
Awesome. I thought I would just give like a little introduction and then completely hand it over to you. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I have a couple of questions. We got some incredible questions from folks who I hope have been able to join us today that I thought I'd share. But I think, you know, it's best if we just sort of let the conversation go where we think it should go.
Great.
But so, you know, a lot of the folks, you know, as we were watching the registrations, a lot of the folks that have signed up, although we saw lots of new faces too, a lot of the folks that have signed up are folks we know, have partnered with for a long time, or are aware of the work that they're doing in a space where they're using sports sort of intentionally to intervene with young people, often young people who've been marginalized or vulnerable in vulnerable populations.
Right.
And because of your work, Bruce, and a lot of the people on this call have heard me recommend over the last 10 years or so that they read The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And because of your work and reading that book and making everyone read that book, I've become convinced that sport isn't just a tool for helping us develop essential skills that we need to be successful in life, like teamwork, communication, discipline. And it's not just to help promote physical health, which it does wonderfully, but that actually may be the most important and most unique thing about sport is its power to help young people deal with stress and overwhelming stress. So the stress that comes with the current COVID-19 crisis brings, I think, the need to support young people even more to the forefront using sport. They're dealing with the uncertainty of this global pandemic, but also the fallout, which we know means that vulnerable populations are being hit even harder. Right. So young people who were vulnerable to begin with are now facing this on top of all of the challenges that they were facing. And as, you know, economic insecurity, unemployment, homelessness, housing insecurity, violence, institutional oppression, all of these things are now sort of on fire, even more so, given what this global health crisis. And so sort of in the face of that stress and the compounded stresses that so many young people that a lot of the folks on this call are working with, I think everyone should know about your work and what you've learned over the last 30 years or so about the power of relationships, physical activity, regulation, all of those things, so that they don't lose hope. I always say to the people, you know, the people who ask why I'm so interested in the brain, and I know, you know, this much about the brain compared to what you know about the brain, but why I'm so interested in it is because it feels so hopeful. And because if you know, once you start to know about the brain and understand that the brain can change, then it feels like some of these intractable challenges that we're facing are maybe not as hopeless as they seem. And that if people can learn from you and learn what you know, that they'll be able to have an impact on young people in the face of all of those challenges. So that's what I'm hoping we'll talk about today, why we should be hopeful, what it is about the brain that people should know, and why sport, you know, when it's done correctly, can really help contribute to that hope and that change that we all want to see.
Sure.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Really
Great. I'd be a little concerned if it didn't.
let me.
Yeah, please.
Just one little response is first of all, I hope my audio quality is okay. Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. So, it's interesting. I grew up as a kid, and my whole sort of self-image, my whole focus, everything that I was concerned about as I was growing up, really, aside from the opposite sex, was sport. Sport was really the organizing, sort of central component of my life, and I ended up kind of going into academics and being sort of professionally active and successful in some regards. But the reality is, all of the fundamental aspects of my success emerged from everything that happened to me when I was an athlete. And Steve Grainer, who is also part of our group, he runs our neurosequential model in education component, but he was also an athlete, and we knew each other when we were growing up, and then he became a teacher. And so we talked all the time about how some of the core principles that we learned in sport about, the things that you mentioned, the power of teamwork, the importance of discipline, the relationship between hard work and accomplishment, which is, I know this sounds very overly simple, but I can't tell you how many people I run into now who kind of want to do brain surgery before they've learned how to wash the test tubes in the lab. They want to, they don't want to sort of go up the ladder and understand the entire process that leads to success. So I was just really lucky that I had great coaches, and it was so, as people, they played such an important part in my development. And so I came into this whole relationship with you with this bias and awareness of how important sport was and the healing powers of sport. In fact, I'd used, not systematically, but we frequently used engagement with sport as a part of our therapeutic plan with a lot of the kids that we worked with that had experienced trauma. And we would frequently hear from kids who had terrible backgrounds about how their healing process had been facilitated by the attention and understanding of a single coach. And again, if you listen to a lot of people that have been successful in sport, many of them have had, some tough things happen in their past. And as they tell their story, one of the things that emerges again and again and again is how teammates, coaches, and the elements of training and competition that were part of their sports experience, they view as part of the healing process. And so I am very, I was aware of this, and I have to say that one of the things that, it's just sort of true confessions, but there's a lot of things that I think about when you'll have an interaction with somebody and it will spark some thinking, but then most of us are not so disciplined that we'll sit down and take that initial set of thoughts and in a really structured way kind of go through it and think about what are the implications, how do you take this new learning and disseminate it. And I really didn't do that with sport until Megan and I and Steve started talking about creating the neurosequential model in sport. And I'm still, there are times when I will sit down and really in a disciplined way think about some of this stuff. But a couple things are really clear. One is that sport integrates and understands the concept of dosing and spacing, and integrates basically interval work better than any other sort of structured human activity. Therapy, and that, as Megan mentioned, one of the remarkable things about the brain is that it's changeable. It changes. But the rules by which systems in the brain change are very similar to the rules by which systems in the your cardiovascular system and your neuromuscular system change. So the dosing and spacing you do with training, weight training or interval training to develop cardiovascular strength, it's the same thing with changing the systems in your brain. And so, nobody trains for competition by having one 45-minute intense session a week, right? Nobody does that. That would be insane. And anybody who's in sport for 10 minutes realizes that, man, I'm not going to get better at basketball if all I do is take 45 minutes once a week and shoot free throws or try to do whatever the skill is that I'm supposed to learn. You just know that just won't happen. But that's exactly what we've been doing in mental health for years. And so one of the beautiful things about sport is that it is naturally structured to provide relational dosing throughout a week in a way that is much more therapeutically sensitive than traditional therapy. And so if a coach or if your teammates are able in moments, not all the time, but in moments, to be present and attentive and respectful and caring and reassuring, all of those things are parts of a therapeutic interaction. And so without really realizing it, a coach that kind of takes a kid aside who seems to be struggling and is patient with them for 5 minutes and kind of tries to understand what's going on. I mean, you're not, for whatever reason, it seems like you're struggling today. And if that moment, believe it or not, even though you really are instructing them about sport, that's a therapeutic interaction. And I think a lot of people underestimate their own sort of therapeutic powers. And that's one of the things that I hope comes out of this neurosequential model in sport process, is that people in sport begin to appreciate how the positive power they have in what they do. And then, as Megan has kind of alluded, that once we understand some of the processes that are underneath this, then we can actually be a lot more intentional about how we structure these therapeutic opportunities that will actually make a dysregulated kid or a traumatized kid healthier, but it will also make them a better athlete. And it will make them more capable of competing under pressure. And so there are multiple positive benefits of being able to create for a child or doesn't have to be a child, it could be an adult, a set of opportunities that are predictable, moderate, and controllable stress. And so really one of the great things about sport is that it is a resilience building activity. And I know a lot of you are probably in school settings or other settings where you've heard people talk about, we throw the term resilience around all the time. And there's, I think, sort of this odd mythology that resilience is something that you learn, and it's not. Resilience is something that you experience. And so when you are in a sport, you are having all kinds of, in practice, predictable, moderate stressors. You're running a play again and again and again. And it's not like you're overwhelmed, but it's stressful to get the route perfectly and do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. And finally you get it. And literally what you're doing is you're creating a resilience building pattern of activity that will generalize not just to the ability to run that play, but it will generalize to the ability to handle another situation under pressure. And there's no other thing in academics really that does that like sport does. Now, some of it happens, you can get a little bit of this, I think, in the performing arts or in drama or other things that involve real life experience where you're doing things under moderate pressure. But sport, again, is really, I think, it's just the bread and butter of sport to do this. That's just what you do. You do drills, you do, practices. And I think that this is one of the incredible powers of sport. So, God, I'm rambling. So let me go back and see, Megan. So that was, see, now this is what happens. That was one, I was just going to make one comment. All right. Are you unmuted, my friend?
I
Oh,
am. Yep.
good.
You were not rambling. I think there were quite a few people who were writing down that resilience is not learned, it's experienced, because a lot of people on this call are charged with making the case for why sport should be part of this conversation. And
Yeah,
I think that is a big piece of it. That idea that sport is uniquely set up to give young people the experience of resilience building, so that that can generalize to other parts of their lives.
exactly. And I think that, I think, you know, one of the challenges is that it's kind of, on one hand, I think that in most educational settings, sport is marginalized. And that's if it's good. You know, that's if they treat you well. A lot of times, not only is it marginalized, but it's demeaned. It's like as if, you know, they act as if there's no intellectual or academic element to it, which is really not fair, because it's fun. You know, good coaches are doing just as much academic and intellectual stuff as somebody who's teaching history. And and again, I don't mean to minimize history or anything else, but I really think that we live in a world that we live in this modern world, right? We've invented this current world, and in the Western world, cognition, language is very important. And so part of what's happened, though, is that we've developed an overemphasis on thinking that words are more powerful than they are. Now, words are powerful, but words are most powerful when the vehicle is an emotional, socially connected person, right? That's what makes the words that are harsh, harsh. It's not the word itself, it's the way it's said. And so we overvalue cognition and we undervalue movement. And one of the most powerful things that we've learned in the last, I don't know, 20 years is that the stress response systems in our body, the systems that influence how we deal with stress, are fundamentally connected to the systems that are involved in moving and rhythm. And so we talk about somatosensory a lot. You know, somato is body and sensory is stuff that involves our senses. But one of the things that we know is that any form of pattern, repetitive, rhythmic, somatosensory activity will make you feel regulated. It'll make you feel better. And so, as all of you know, sport is just permeated with pattern, repetitive, rhythmic movement. And so independent of all these other things I've been talking about, the ability of physical activity that goes with sport to make somebody feel calmer, to regulate them, is also tremendously powerful in both healing, but also powerful in allowing someone who engages in these pattern repetitive activities to be open to learning new things, new cognitive things, new motor things, new social things, and so forth. And again, this is completely, this powerful, just unavoidable reality of the human condition is completely ignored in education. So instead of letting kids rock or move or stand while they're learning some cognitive concept, we tell Billy to quit rocking. Stop rocking, you're distracting everybody else in the class. Quit tapping your pencil. Don't wiggle your leg. Don't walk, don't stand, don't get up, don't touch, all of these things that kids would normally do while they're learning. I mean, my grandsons, while they're learning things, they literally crawl over furniture and they kind of lay upside down. And people say, pay attention. But the reality is they hear you better when they're moving than when they're sitting. And this is something that academics has a hard time figuring out. And again, one of the great things about the neurosequential model in education for us is that Steve Grainer, a coach, is the head of it. So he appreciates rhythm and movement, and he's incorporated that into all of the stuff that we're trying to help educators bring into the classroom. So.
Yeah. That makes me think about two things. One, just sort of as a side comment, how exciting it is to us to be working with you on this, because the neurosequential model is being applied across disciplines, so that ideally there'd be a community of people speaking the same language. So, a young person's entire team of folks who are there to support them would be able to understand each other and direct interventions that complement and build on each other.
Yeah.
So that's just sort of exciting for us, and I think a really important piece of the context in which some of these programs are operating. A lot of our programs operate in schools or operate in out of school time, and are always trying to figure out how to weave together with the other adults that young people are in young people's lives. And sometimes that means sort of recruiting new adults into a young person's life as well.
Yeah.
The other thing, you started talking about patterned repetitive rhythmic experiences, which again, people who spend time with me were not surprised to hear come up on this call, particularly given, just how present they are in sport, right? How much, how easy they are to find virtually in any sport, how throwing a ball against a wall, or playing catch, or dribbling a basketball, or rowing creates those experiences, those calming experiences for young people. And how for a lot of coaches, if we can flip the idea that those are things that you do to sort of warm up, which coaches have naturally figured out, but that they can also be things to help de-escalate young people or regulate young people who are sort of having a tough time. I think that kind of intervention is so much more powerful than the ones that we tend to rely on, which are ones that are about the thinking part of the brain, right? We ask young people to be rational when they're dysregulated, and we know that that's not actually a useful way to be. And it made me think, for the folks on the call who don't know as much about the brain structure, could you talk about why regulation is so important as a first step to get to, like you said, both from a healing perspective and then also how it helps them be open to learning?
Yeah. Let me share my slides here. And tell me, Megan, if when I do this, do you see the big slide, or you just see?
I do.
Okay.
Big slide.
Big slide. Okay. All right. So let me just start with our basic, what we call, it's a heuristic. We use the term model, but again, the brain's incredibly complex. And one of the things that we use to teach is this upside down triangle brain. And part of what we're trying to show here is that the brain is organized in a hierarchical way. It goes really from the bottom to the top. And if you want to get really complicated, it's inside out. But just think about it as sort of this hierarchical system. And at the bottom, you have these systems that are involved in really regulatory things: sleep, blood pressure regulation, heart rate. And as you get higher in the brain, I have to help somebody out here and mute them. Where's my cursor? Okay. All right, so I'm muted. All right, so back to this. So and the top part of the brain is the thinking part of the brain. This is a part of the brain that is involved in, speech and language is in the top part of the brain. And if you think about the future, it's the top part of the brain. You think about the past. So all of this stuff that's uniquely human is in the top part of your brain. And then the other part that we use with this little model to help people sort of appreciate is that there are these really important core regulatory networks. And you guys have probably heard of some of them: norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. And collectively, these neural networks reach every part of the brain and influence every part of the body. So because of that, these are the fundamental systems that are involved in the stress response. Now, so what will happen is, if you you get some sort of input that comes into your brain, and the nonstop input that's coming in from the outside world says everything's familiar, everything's safe, you're not hungry, you're not thirsty, you're not cold, you're not threatened, you don't have any big challenges in front of you right now. So what'll happen is you can be in this state. You can use the smart part of your brain, you can use sort of the emotional part of your brain, and really all of these parts of the brain are available for you to use. But typically when you're sitting and thinking and feeling safe and calm, you're not really recruiting a lot of systems in the lower part of the brain. But once you start to get threatened, the first thing that happens is your brain activates systems that you need to survive right now, and it shuts down systems that are not that important. So the truth is, when you're under threat, if something is threatening you, you don't really need to be thinking about 3 years ago what you got for your birthday, right? And you don't need to be thinking about, 5 years from now, I want to open a tap dancing school in Cleveland. That doesn't matter right now, right? So what matters right now is that, what's going on right in this present moment. Where is the saber-toothed tiger? What should I do? And so the shift from this kind of a brain where you can think to this part of the brain where you act is what we call state-dependent function. And basically what we know is that the more threatened you get, the more you sort of go down this, in lower and lower parts of the brain end up controlling your functioning. And so if you're really threatened, you literally are thinking with a much lower IQ than you would if you were in this reflective, calm state. And so the more threatened you get, honestly, and I don't mean to be crude about it, but the dumber you get. You just get really dumb. And you can get to the point where you're literally not thinking at all. You're just completely reacting. And this is an issue. And I keep muting folks. I'm not sure why. So that's the key to, and I don't think I really have it in this slide deck necessarily. I may have brought it in for later on, but one of the things that happens during sport is that when you compete, you don't want to be in your head too much. You kind of want to be in a partially disengaged state where you're kind of automatically doing what you practiced again and again and again. And of course, one of the worst things that you can do if you're pitching or throwing a football or whatever is start to overthink or start to aim. When you get cognition involved in sort of practice motor skills, it interferes with it. And so, that's a whole different sort of a part of understanding how the state-dependent functioning. But in general, you want to be relatively regulated so you have more control over what parts of the brain that you turn on and what parts of the brain you turn off. And one of the things that we know is, and I'm going to just, I think it's right here. Here's our upside down triangle brain that we use all the time to teach. And one of the things that the brain does when you're sort of, as your brain develops in utero, because your brain does develop in utero very rapidly. And then after birth, your brain develops very, very rapidly. And so the early developmental experiences are really one of the major jobs sort of the brain, is to help you make sense out of all the sensory input that you're surrounded by. And so your brain is trying to make you connect sights with sounds. And so if every time you see, see the face of your mother come towards you and you hear her speak, your brain begins to connect her face with that sound, and then it will connect her smell with that sound, and it will connect the way she touches you with that sound. And your brain creates a very complex set of what we call associations. They're memories, basically. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that when you are in utero, when you are a little fetal organizing, creature, your brain is going to be getting all kinds of input from your fetal body that says, I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, I'm not cold. Because you're 98.7 and you're not thirsty because you're getting nonstop calories from mom, and you're not thirsty because you're in liquid. And so your brain's basically getting signals from your internal systems saying, I'm regulated, I'm satisfied, I'm regulated, I'm regulated, I'm regulated. And your brain at the same time, in going into the same part of the brain, is going to get nonstop pattern, repetitive, rhythmic input that comes from the maternal heart rate. And so, and all of that incoming rhythmic sensory input gets tied to the input from your soma, your body, somatic input that says, I'm regulated, I'm regulated, I'm regulated. That your brain makes an association, a connection between pattern, repetitive, somatosensory activity and being regulated. And so later on, when you're born and you get overwhelmed, and mom can hold you and then rock you at the same frequency that her resting heart rate was in utero, and you feel regulated. And as you get old, and so caring for the newborn infant reinforces these primary rhythms. So as you get older, pattern, repetitive, rhythmic activity, whether it's music, running, swimming, rowing, rocking yourself, all of it, and it's all the same rhythm. It's all in the primary rhythm or the submultiple rhythm of the primary heart rate in utero. And so this is one of the reasons that when you get really dysregulated, you go for a walk or you go for a run or you go row, that you feel better. Or you put on your headphones and you listen to music, you feel more regulated. And so what that does is it can shift you out of a state of dysregulation, which is really, really important, because the brain is it develops in a sequential way from the bottom to the top, but it also processes all present experience. So when you talk to somebody, if you're a coach and you're talking to a student and they see you and they hear your voice, that's going to come into the lowest, dumbest part of their brain. And if they have a previous association, if in their past, when they were little, when they were younger, if somebody was yelling at their mother and used that tone of voice in a situation where they got hurt, what's going to happen is they're going to activate their stress response system and then shut down their cortex. So they're not even going to hear what you're talking about. And I can guarantee you that everybody listening has had an interaction with somebody they've coached where they thought they were connecting with them, and it was basically all the words you said just got short-circuited halfway up to the cortex. And so this is why we talk about this sequence of engagement. You really can't get any cognitive content up into this part of the brain unless you first go through the middle part of the brain. And the best way to get through the middle part of the brain is to be connected with somebody and they feel relationally connected to you. And the best way that's going to happen is if they're regulated and they feel relatively safe with you. So if there's a history of you treating your athlete in a respectful way and sticking up for them under a certain situation, when you get into a situation where everybody's distressed and it's a competitive situation, for example, and you realize that they're pretty dysregulated, you pull them over to the side because they just got in a fight with somebody on court. You pull them over to the side, you connect with them, you look at them, and even if you're a little, if you raise your voice to them a little bit, because you have that whole history, you're going to be able to regulate them, and then they're going to be able to hear you. And you're going to be able to say, listen, don't let him get under your skin. He's got you dysregulated. Don't let him get under your skin. Just calm yourself down. And you have them sit for for 2 minutes. They'll do their own, all athletes have learned a little bit of sort of regulatory ritual that they'll use. If they're successful, they have. If they're not, you can teach them how to do that. But they'll regulate themselves. They'll get back in the game and they'll perform better. So regulation really is the key to anybody having successful access to the higher parts of your brain. If you're not regulated, you can't really connect with somebody else. And so one of the key things is, if you're a regulated coach and you've got a dysregulated student, dysregulated, athlete, if you stay calm. Now, this is part of the wonderful thing about the human brain. It's a social brain, and it's intended to connect with other people. And so if you stay regulated, pretty soon the person that you're interacting with will reflect your regulation. In our NM sport things, we talked about this a lot, that, if you have a coach that's sort of panicked at the end of a game, it's going to make that, it's going to make his athletes panic too. If you've got a coach who stays regulated, he's going to be able to regulate. But if you've got, if both the coach and the athlete are dysregulated, they're going to co-dysregulate each other. And they'll both start to act in a very immature, aggressive, regressed way. This is where, coaches end up like hitting a kid, and, the kind of meltdowns that you see where the coach yells at the kid and the kid screams back, and then the coach says, "You do what I say." And the kid starts to walk away, and coach grabs him, and pretty soon you've got a mess. That's because they're both dysregulated. So you would much rather be here. You want the coach to stay regulated. Regulation, honestly, regulation is the key to everything. If you stay regulated, you've got access to all these incredible parts of your brain. If you get dysregulated, all these wonderful, amazing parts of your brain, you don't have access to them. You can't use them. Anyway, I'm rambling, so
You're not. The comments that were going while you were speaking, this is definitely hitting home for lots of folks. It makes me think about two things that are particularly important right now. First is that we all have to be, a lot of us are responsible right now for trying to maintain connections and keep, sort of buffering young people from the impact of the stress that we're all under right now.
Yeah.
And so number one, we have to figure out how to keep ourselves regulated. And number two, how important the patterned repetitive rhythmic experiences can be, and how important the connection is, and all the things that we can do, even if they feel small, to make sure those two things are showing up in a young person's life.
Yeah.
What do you see as things that people should know in terms of what they should be doing? What kind of tools should they be giving to kids? How should they be setting up this connection that's physically distant? So
here's the dilemma, and as you've sort of outlined it, so everybody, I think, everybody's under some kind of pressure. Now, some people are feeling less distressed by this than other people, but pretty much everybody's feeling it in one way or another. And I think many people have had an opportunity to kind of use their regular kind of physical activity routines to stay regulated. Some people are still getting a chance to go out and run, and, people are doing some online exercise stuff. So that's probably okay. But at the same time that you're doing these self-regulatory things, the systems you work in are in disarray. So schools don't know when they're going to go back. Park districts have canceled summer camps. All of the things that you normally use. I mean, a lot of people on this call probably make a living by having these group activities, and a lot of them are being canceled. So you've got this uncertainty about even your business, that like the organization you work with. I mean, how are we going to do this? So there's a lot of uncertainty that is out there, and the best thing you can do to turn the and this is sort of it's kind of a trick, but the reality is you have to keep telling yourself that what is going to happen for the next 6 months is predictable, but it's predictably unpredictable. And so don't be surprised by changes in policy. Don't be surprised by you were going this direction and now you're going that direction. You need to anticipate just that's the nature of what's happening now. That is the nature of crisis. The nature of crisis is that any rule that you think is at play is likely to be changed within the next 2 weeks. So just once you sort of let yourself go with that, then you're like, all right, that's okay. That's the way it's going to be. And then the second thing you need to keep thinking about is that you have much more power over your own regulatory state than you frequently acknowledge. You're much more powerful than you think you are. You can bring regulating structure to your day. You can use whatever discipline you use to make yourself an Olympic athlete or to make yourself a successful business person or whatever it was. You can bring those same skills to play in your daily routine with your family that will begin to make you feel like you're in more control than. And the reality is, you are in control. You're in control of if you make your bed every day. You're in control if you get up at the same time every day. I know this sounds crazy, but I'm actually very unstructured about some parts of my life, but I'm incredibly disciplined about other parts. But as soon as all the rest of the stuff that I usually let kind of just go, as soon as I was losing the ability to control some things, I recognized that I had to start to be much more structured than I normally am. And I really need to be more I need to bring the structured discipline into my day, because all the other things that were disciplining me are gone. There was nobody's telling me that I have to be at work at 9, and nobody's telling me that this meeting has to be at that time. And there's a little bit of that, but the truth is, part of what I think that you can do that's really important is to recognize that you actually you can bring structure into your life in a way that will make the stressors more moderate. The second thing I think that is going to be really important is that every one of you that's listening cares about the kids you work with. You care about the people you work with, you care about the kids and the families you work with. And again, what I want you to hear is that you can connect with them in ways that are powerful and sustaining, but that are brief. A lot of people, like teachers, for example, have been very, very anxious when I say stuff like, well, you just talk, they're like, well, what am I going to do? I'm so worried about my kids. I just call them. It's like, call them. Connect with them, send them a text. And then they're worried about, oh my God, I have 30 kids in my class. How am I going to spend, do I have to do this every day? And how long do I have to? And I'm like, no, they don't want to hear from you every day. They want to know every once in a while that you're thinking about them. And you can do that by sending them a little text. And see, the great thing about the human brain is this, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go off tangent, but I hope this makes the point. One of the things that you have, as coaches, probably have experienced, or if you do any work with a new group of kids, one of the things that you've learned is that the first time they see you and you see them and you try to remember their faces and all that and their names and everything else, is that you don't know them very well. And because of this neurosociology of human beings, new faces basically activate a stress response. So even if you're there, if you want to be at this sports camp and you meet a new person, there's a little bit of stress that goes with the novelty. And after you see them 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, their face becomes familiar, the smile becomes more automatic, the playfulness is easier, you know them better, kind of, the way they are, how they're going to respond to directions, and so you know them. And so what has happened is that you've had a bunch of little interactions that have built into your brain, into your sort of the catalog in your brain that stores faces. You've got them in your head. And so now they're familiar, and it's a whole different interaction than when you first knew them. Now, usually, if you're in a camp situation, this happens because you see them 7, 8, 9 times during the day, and then you see them the next day 7, 8, 9 times. If this happens in therapy or as a teacher, you may see them, it may take a couple weeks because there's so many faces to kind of catalog and have individual experiences with. But one of the things that you can do, and I've learned how to do this when I was working with the FBI, with the serial killer and child abduction unit, I would interview kids where we had 24 hours to get as much information as possible. And so the children who had been witnesses to abductions, for example, they were scared to death. You know, a terrible traumatic thing had happened. All kinds of police were swooping in, new faces. They were taking these kids from their homes and interviewing them in police stations and all kinds of stuff that was just well-intended, but biologically, predictably going to make these kids scared to death. And so that if you remember what I said about the cortex, right? The cortex, all the stuff that they should have remembered about this happened and this happened, and he was wearing a red shirt and he had black hair and he had a mustache, all that's up in your cortex. So that's going to collapse if you're frightened. So the first thing that you learn to do, that I learned to do, was that I would go in and I would meet a child. First of all, I'd interview them in their home. I would go in and I would look at them face to face down on the floor. I'd make them look at me and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Perry. You and I are going to play a little bit today. And then later on, we're going to talk about what happened to your sister." And then I would leave. And that was what, 15 seconds, not even that. And of course, in the beginning, when the FBI was watching me do this, they're like, what the hell are you doing? I'd see the kid and then I'd leave. And the agent would be like, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to just walk outside for about 7, 8 minutes. And so what happens is, because the systems in the brain that store your face, they get a little bit of stimulation. But if I stayed there for 15 or 20 minutes, I would not stimulate that part of the brain anymore, because the brain works not like an organ, it works like a piano. So if you press on a piano key, you get one sound. And if you keep your finger on the key, you don't get any more sound, right? No more sound. You go ding, that's it. But if you go like this on an organ and you keep pressing the organ, it keeps making the sound. So the brain, systems in the brain, and this is really important for sport, because it's the same thing with all physiological systems in the body. They function like pianos. They respond to pulsatile stimulus. So if I want to keep making a ding noise with a piano, I have to go ding, 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 ding. So I leave and I give that part of the brain enough time to recharge. I come back in, I interact with the child for 25 seconds and I leave. And I do this 10, 15 times. And I do that over the course of 2 hours. And at the end of 2 hours, his brain thinks I'm familiar. It's almost like I'd done 20 therapy sessions with him. And so he's talking to me in full paragraphs. He describes exactly what happened, where he was, what the guy looked like, what kind of truck he was driving. And that's only because his brain essentially responded to 15-second long, 20-second long, 2-minute long experiences. And the reason I'm telling you this is that you can make a student or somebody you work with feel like they spent an hour working with you if you call them and interact with them for 2 or 3 minutes. To the part of their brain that says, I had an experience with Tamara or Adrienne or Megan, you know, that part of your brain kind of gets quenched in the first couple of minutes. And so all of you who've been on Zoom meetings, and, you know, you don't need to keep staring at that person that you're, you know, an hour meeting with somebody. The first couple of minutes is kind of fun to watch them and look at their house and you go, oh, it's in the background. And, you know, you do that. And then after a while, it's like, you don't need an hour of that. You just need a little bit of that to feel like I spent some time with Megan. And I think that that's what you all need to hear, is that you can stay connected to and you can have meaningful, positive interactions with all of these folks you work with, kids you want to stay connected with, by tiny little doses of contact, whether it's even a little text, and every once in a while, say, hey, you got time for a 2-minute FaceTime, just say, hey, I wanted to just see your face and say hi. That's it. You don't need to do, 30-minute long things. Anyway, that's what I think is important. The human moment where you're fully present and you're really interested in them and you're looking them in the eyes and you're truly listening. If you do that, that only needs to be moments long.
Amazing. Thank you. That's really helpful. I think that it's easy to feel discouraged right now. And it's easy to feel like, in the face of what a lot of young people are dealing with, that something like 30-second text or 5 minutes on Zoom, getting to see someone's face, doesn't make a difference. And I think it's really important for people on the call to understand that it does.
Yeah.
And to be armed with the reason why, so that they can make the case to the people who have the resources, who are going to be trying to figure out how to help young people get through and beyond this.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that's, if it's okay, we could, that would be the place to sort of end, is you can choose to work with any kind of provider that you want. And you have worked with all kinds of them in the mental health field, juvenile justice, the child protection systems, education, all across all of those. What's unique about sport providers, and how can we, and what case should we be making to people who have the money to make sure that these programs stick around and are available to young people as we come out of this?
Well, one of the things that I hope that can come from this is that, because there are elements of a shared experience, lots of people who didn't quite understand stress and distress the way we want to talk about it, they didn't have, we didn't have like a universal touchstone. But I think now that when we're trying to help people understand things like state-dependent functioning, and remember how you try to work and were trying to be efficient, but you're pretty dysregulated. You woke up on a Monday morning after a weekend and you were tired. And, that's because of X, Y, and Z. So if we have a little window of time where we can educate people in these policymaking and program funding positions about these issues, then it's a very easy, logical next step to say, all right, you can either develop all these trauma-informed practices, or you can actually look around at what is already doing that. And the truth is, a light touch engagement with existing sports or existing sports programs to give them a little bit more knowledge about these things is going to have more impact than inventing some program from the bottom up. Because the one thing that we've learned that's so important is that relationships are the key to all of this, but not artificial relationships. And sport creates real relationships. The relationship that a coach has with an athlete, it's a real relationship. It's not, we're not building self-esteem by letting kids beat us at checkers, which is unfortunately a lot of what happens with some of these artificial experiences. These are real experiences with real relationships with real people. And if we make coaches 5% more trauma-informed or developmentally sensitive, we will end up having more therapeutic impact on children than if we, trained an entire new cohort of trauma therapists. And so I think I think the key is, and this is the hard part, the key is access to people that are going to fund your programs, and then being able to talk with them in ways that they begin to appreciate that sports aren't just fluff. They're not just an add-on. They really should be at the core of an educational curriculum. Movement, sport, appreciating what sport does about for the social emotional learning experiences. You know, it's amazing. People pay millions of dollars to bring in a social emotional curriculum into a school. And the fact is there's social emotional stuff already there that just needs a light touch of sort of a tiny little pivot in the way they understand what they're doing. And this goes not just for sport, but for music and for drama and for art. And all of these things are more real experiences than sitting in a class and not moving and listening to a didactic lecture. And so you will rarely heal from the top down. You know, you heal from the bottom up, just like the way your brain develops and the way you process all experience. And sport is a bottom up activity. Just by definition it is, because you very rarely do you make people sit in sport and listen. You make them move and listen. You make them do other things and listen. You might make them stop for a moment and attend and then start moving, but you don't immobilize the lower part of the brain and then say, I want access to the cortex. You basically get the bottom part of the brain moving, open up the cortex, and then you can connect. So,
yeah. If you're doing it right, you don't immobilize. You don't make them stop
right.
and listen. I've seen too many coaches do that, though.
Right, and see, that's where, I mean, it's not like, right, that's why the coaches need help to understand this and to shift the way they do these things. But it's sort of like, you know, why tear down all of these beautiful old buildings in a city? Why don't we just renovate them? You know, we don't need a whole new infrastructure. We just need to kind of rehab them. So
absolutely. I think we're at time. It's 1:01. So,
oh, it is? Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but my computer's is off by like 3 minutes. It's weird.
Well,
anyway, no, it's all right.
We did it.
We did it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
this was
let's do
really
this
great.
again. I like this.
Yeah, let's definitely.
But I would love to have more people talking. I mean, instead of just me talking.
Well, I think everybody was pretty keen on having you talk for this one.
Well, next time I'll put a muzzle on myself.
Really, I've been reading the comments as you've been talking, and people are. It seems like folks are really finding this helpful. So we really do appreciate you taking the time. We are good. I imagine we can make a link of this available for anybody who didn't get to be with us.
Yes, absolutely. I will. I'll record this. We'll put it on we have a COVID resource support page, and we'll put it there, and then we can give it to you. You guys can put it wherever you want to. And
awesome.
And then I will take some of the comments and go through them as well, and maybe we can make some responses to some of the questions.
Awesome. And there are sport webinars on the Neurosequential Network if people are interested in the first set of neurosequential model and sport webinars, if people are feeling like they need to know more about the brain.
Awesome. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. Hey, how's little Squirt?
He's great. Thanks.
Good. You getting any sleep?
He doesn't love sleeping, but he's doing great.
Well, that's awesome.
He likes it more than he used to. So progress.
That's good. There you go. It goes so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Long days, short weeks, sort of.
Yep.
Yeah. He's already 9 weeks old today. So
I can't believe that. That's crazy.
I know. But the things you're talking about brain development, you know, I rock him in such a patterned, repetitive, rhythmic way, and actually had a conversation with my husband about it because it wasn't his instinct to do that. He was sort of a little more jittery.
He was a jiggler?
And yeah, and but sure, the baby does quiet right down when he experiences that. So it's been really fun.
I love it. I love it. All right.
All right, thank
Send
you.
more pictures.
Yes. And just, I want to make sure, shout out to all the folks who were on. We have amazing partners. We have amazing funders. We have amazing people who care a lot and have supported us in this space. Special shout out to Harlan Lacrosse, who is having discussion groups after this. They had their entire staff come on and are having discussion groups. So that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You know, next time we do this, we can actually use our breakout room feature, and we, you know, people want to go into smaller groups and talk about this, we can do that.
It seems like people will be excited to continue the conversation. So you've really lit a fire under folks.
All right. I'm always happy to kick the beehive, light a fire, burn the house down. Happy to do it.
All right.
See you guys.
Thank you.
You
Take
bet.
care.